Good morning, friends.
Good morning.
Who are you?
Today?
Today, well, I don't know. We hope we'll all be different tomorrow.
Handmaiden.
You're a handmaiden.
I want to be.
You want to be a handmaiden. You're all kind of a fresh audience to me. So, first of all, I say everything I say from me. And the fact that I've been on the House of Justice and everything doesn't give me more authority to say anything. Anybody speaks to you in the faith, listen to them with an open heart, okay? And then go check the books to see if what they said is correct or not. So everything that you hear, I may say some things today, and some of you will say, "Oh, I never heard that before." That's right, you never heard it before. But you might have read it before if you've been studying the writings. The whole idea is that our unity comes from the revelation, comes from the Word of God, and not from the different views of different speakers and so on. Now, there's been a kind of effort in the faith the last couple of decades to reduce to fancy speakers and so on. Well, I don't know what I somehow survived that, and I'm here and now to talk to you. I'd like to. Is there anybody that's here fresh, that's a visitor to the Baha'i summer school that hasn't heard of the faith before? Didn't get that impression. How do we see? How many of you have been Baha'is for 20 years? Oh my goodness, you should be teaching me instead of me. How many of you have been Baha'is for 30 years? Oh my goodness. You remember the antediluvian times. I've been a Baha'i since 1956. So I had the good fortune of the first couple of years of my Baha'i life, the Guardian was still alive. And one felt that influence. Is there anybody else here who was a Baha'i in the time of the Guardian? Good for you. Oh, look at this. Wonderful. I think you'll remember how exciting it was. The Pilgrims were coming back, and the Guardian was saying stronger things to them than he was putting in his messages, or at least they were more veiled in the messages. And he was trying to generally move us. I remember Florence Mayberry came back. She'd been on pilgrimage in early 57. And she said, the Guardian said from Southern California, he wanted a veritable exodus of Baha'is out into the international field. There are too many Baha'is there. That sounded really exciting. I just started a career in films, and I thought, well, I don't know where I'm going to go to find more film career, but eventually I went off to rainforest and it didn't matter anyway. So. Then he also said, let them go now, because in the future they'll go as refugees and it won't be as pleasant. And there's obviously not just the Guardian, we have it from the Master, we have it from Baha'u'llah, but there's calamities ahead of us. And all those calamities are our providence, and all of those will be very healthy outcome for mankind. But it may be a little tough along the middle portion of it. We're not told that the Baha'is will be protected from those things. We'll suffer along with everybody else. But we have a terrific boon because we have the faith to fall back on. We have our knowledge of the teachings. There's far too much to talk about in 3 hours or whatever it is I've got. But I wanted to start way back at a kind of overview, if you'll allow me. We live in a very materialistic time. And it's very hard to not absorb because it's constantly coming at us, and our whole education was based on it. And so we tend to interpret things more or less according to popular view and popular opinion. And what some people have termed scientism has become one of our gods. If science says it's so, well then it's so. But you have lived a long time, most of you have lived a long time, and you've seen science change its views fairly radically. much quicker than revelation changes its views. And so we want to base our basic outlook on existence on the revelation. And in the revelation, we see Baha'u'llah says that this universe is very ancient indeed. In fact, it's had no beginning, and it will have no end. So creation stories have something to do with hierarchy of powers and precedence rather than with time sequence. There wasn't a time when God didn't have a creation. He always had a creation. He has an infinite creation. And it was always there. And that's how that is we don't understand. And nor is there any attempt in the Revelation to explain it. I suppose we can't get that far into it. But what he does say is that everything that exists is emanated from God. There is a God. Anything you can imagine about that God is not God. For starters, so if you have an idea about God, I have an idea, I feel mostly he's off somewhere, and sometimes he's in a cloud and I don't know what, or he's in the heart of little children, or whatever we imagine. The universe is endless in regard to the purpose of creation, which is the knowledge and love of God. So the whole thing is put up for that purpose. So it's not going to be empty. Baha'u'llah says every fixed star has planets, every planet has creatures. Abdu'l-Baha says that this emanation of spirit from God is divided into various degrees or grades. We're familiar with that, the mineral spirit, and the vegetable spirit, and the animal spirit, and the human spirit, and the regenerated human spirit, the spirit with the spirit of faith, and the manifestations of God as another level of manifestation. All of evolution, spiritual development, everything is moving towards the manifestation of all those levels of spirit. Abdu'l-Baha says in the tablet, there's no way to calculate the number of manifestations of God appearing to the creatures created by God. Everywhere there's creatures, there are manifestations. There is no human existence, true human existence, without the manifestation, because he awakens the capacity to be human in us animals. Basically, we're not very good for anything until the manifestation starts transforming us. That's not so easy to swallow at the beginning because we kind of think we're something special. But now, I want to share Pilgrim notes. You know about Pilgrim notes. I'm going to give you a little sales pitch. These Pilgrim notes are from two very solid pilgrims. That doesn't make any difference, but it sounds good in introducing the subject to. One of them is Gladys Whedon, who was quite close with Ray O'Connor, lived a time in the Holy Land and was invited by the Guardian to be one of his assistants for a period. And she has written down, she was there for some months, so she heard Shoghi Effendi say things, she heard Shoghi Effendi repeat things. Another is Larry House, went early on from America and caught the Guardian's eye, and he asked him, very few pilgrims, that he said, please, will you just stay, don't go back, go stay here for me and work for me, work with me. And Larry was one of them, and he worked with the government, getting all kinds of permits and things related to the development of the institutions on Mount Carmel. So, and the reason I bring this up is because in the writings we've got some of the stages, but we don't have some of these other stages that they said Shoghi Effendi mentioned about the unities that are coming. The whole idea of the oneness of God gets reflected in the whole of creation, but it comes by stages. And he said here it's come by families, tribal unities, city-states, nations. Now we're going to have this international federation of nations. And Shoghi Effendi said that's the top development on this planet. The next thing is with contacts with civilizations on other planets. And that will require manifestations to unite us with them. Mr. Olinga told me, he said he heard from Shoghi Effendi, that Shoghi Effendi said at the end of a cycle, this cycle we're in, a manifestation will appear to unite our solar system. move beyond this unity of all the planets in our solar system and their civilizations, some of which he said are far, far superior to us. In fact, the Guardian repeated to Mr. Oling and it's other places, that this planet is the hell of the planets. It's the most backward. It's the tail of the dog. Now, you have to understand that in terms of religious truth being relative and not absolute. The relative truth is that this is the great day of God, the appearance of a universal manifestation, the like of which this planet has no record of. Here he is. He's Baha'u'llah, and he just far surpasses anything we've had in the past. And his influence is such that he's going to unite the whole of mankind and make it one going forward. And that will enable us then to connect with other civilizations, which are probably scared of us at the moment. It's a pretty scary place. You think of the last century, how many people, governments and wars killed. And Abdu'l-Baha says the worst thing that can happen is to take a human life. That's the worst, the lowest. So, when Mr. Olinga said, I must have looked a little startled when the Guardian said that to me, he said, they still make war. I mean, we're pretty backward, We're a little bit out of that, having received the revelation and trying to think in terms of peace and so on. So we've got a universe. In these pilgrims say, so the Guardian waxed eloquent that night. Gladys says, he looked at the ceiling and he started saying, and after we have interplanetary unity, we will have interstellar unities. And after that, we'll have intercosmic unities. And he said, in the spiritual realm, parallel unities are being established. Right? That's just like, what an explosion, Who are we? Who are me? Who am I? In the midst of all of this plan. We have a marvelous opportunity because everything that emanates from God is based on His goodness and His love and His light. My light is in thee. Get thou from it thy radiance. And he comes back in different places. The Master also, he says that our human existence starts as a spiritual emanation. It's not material. That spiritual impulse that is you and me takes on, by the powers that are inherent in a human soul, takes on a vesture, which is this human body and personality that we have. And it's at that moment that we become either male or female, which I don't think is up for grabs. And we go forward in this life. The senses that we have are clearly spiritual powers as well as physical powers. When you're dreaming, how is it that you see when your eyes are closed? How is it that you hear when your ears are deaf? So the whole question of our reality is a spiritual reality. It continues. It doesn't flicker for a moment. It has clouds that come in between it and its source at times that dim us and give us illness, and some of our old folks, we lose all our powers for a time, but that's just temporary. How many of you have seen at the time of death of near ones that they come lucid at the end and say goodbye or say something or say that I'm talking to my mom or whatever it is that's going on? These are such mysterious things. We transition out of here. We've been created, as has the whole universe, to know and worship God. The Word of God is the transforming power. When the manifestation of God is in the world, He is the living Word of God, the walking Word of God, the walking book, He calls Himself. And He speaks and trains and is able to cause profound, deep changes in souls if they turn to Him. I think you've all probably read enough of Baha'i history to realize that people coming into the presence of the manifestation, some of them were completely overwhelmed. I mean, they collapsed. Others saw something but didn't follow it. Others saw a human being. It seems that in the next world we have the same challenge. People who haven't heard of the faith, they can hear the faith when they go to the next world, but whether they like the light of the faith or not depends on how much self-love they have, how much passion they're attached to from this life that they can't make an easy transition. All that will go forward. I don't know. Those are mysterious things we can't see in that world very, very clearly, but it's quite there. The help of the other world is another thing that is mentioned in the writings, not stressed very much, and we're kind of drifting away from talking about it at all. You have it in the first part of your prayer book here where it says, whenever you recite the words of God, the scattering angels of the Almighty take the influence of those words, which have a powerful inner influence, and distribute it amongst your neighbors. Talk about how to transform a neighborhood. You think you've got to go out there and do something. Yes, you do, but your prayers are a powerful influence on everything around you. And the closer that you draw to God, the more powerful that influence becomes. That's not your influence, that's His influence. When we allow Him to take over and act through us, He is the source of our good works and of our smiles and of everything else. That's a wonderful thing. Abdu'l-Baha says the service of the friends belongs to God, not to them. There's a line in the Gleam, it's a pretty powerful thing to think about. He says, all good comes from God and all evil comes from your own selves. You can throw that on his head and you can say, no good ever comes from you. All good comes from God. It's His prompting, it's His blessings which enable you to reflect His light. And that's the source of all goodness and truth. So we're going to invent something, we're going to be something special. The best we can be is powerless. And he says that's the acme of human knowledge, powerlessness. Recognition because of seeing the power of God. Why do we testify? I testify at this moment to my powerlessness and to thy might, to my poverty and to thy wealth, because those are like terrific gates that open to us His wealth and His power and enable us to serve the cause in surprising manners in which we wouldn't otherwise do. Well, we need to think it through, it seems to me. Friends, many of you have been around a long time. You've seen the transition to what has been called the new culture in the faith. You should understand some of the roots of why this has happened. This is my own understanding and take of it, but I lived right through the middle of it. The excitement about mass teaching which took place in Africa in the second half of the crusade burst out upon the world as an easy formula for enrolling Baha'is. Watch them. If they have love, if they're attracted to the faith, bring them in. They can go out again, but bring them in. The people who were heady with that were going around doing it. I was one of them. Bringing people in, by masses of people in. It was thrilling. But it violated something the Guardian said. He said that enrollment and consolidation, expansion and consolidation should go hand in hand. So we didn't have any plan for consolidation. And we had Hands of the Cause inspired to say, just go forward with it. This is Baha'u'llah's plan. He'll take care of his own. Yeah, that's right. Except gradually that we accumulated tens of thousands of Baha'is all around the world with no follow-up. Nobody ever spoke to them a second time. Or if they did, they said, where did you get my name? I didn't say anything about being a Baha'i, because they didn't quite. Now, amongst the illiterate masses where there's no way to get them to have a program of reading and study and so on, this didn't go forward. There was the only way to teach them was to announce the faith to them. And you saw them take light, and they came in. I don't mean to say that was insincere. But gradually, as the decades passed, and those decades I was serving in there, NSA started to own up. They wrote and said, look, this year our statistics are based on known Baha'is, who we know where they are and that they're alive. Most of the Baha'is that we have no address for. The transition was painful. The house said to them, separate your Baha'is that you have no address for and the ones you have addresses for. The addresses for ones, of course, is where the delegate base would be extended for the election of your institutions. And the others, well, let us carry them as numbers for the time and fill them in, replace them if they're gone, and just go forward, So it wasn't so radical, I think. But later on they said, no, the ones that we have no addresses for, we have no knowledge of. We have no way to. And so we have reduced our total number of eyes from 80,000 to 950. Oh. Well, the House got this over and over in different countries. It just happened as an avalanche. And it says, well, how are we going to go forward? The people that have come into the faith, that don't know what it is and haven't had any consolidation, something has to be done. And that was when they renewed the Guardians' talk about institutes. Important to have institutes in which the Baha'is become grounded in the essential verities of the faith, in the fundamental truths of the cause. That's the first mention you see of the kind of institute process we have today was mentioned by the House in those terms in the mid-90s. Now later on, after some years of experimentation, they commended to us the Ruhi process of institutes from Colombia. And that became a model, more or less, for the world. But it didn't start that way. And it doesn't mean that it's a permanent element of the Institute program. It's not the same as the Institute program. It's the present program that we're operating in. Now, for the Baha'is, who had been Baha'is, like maybe you have been at the time that the Institute was introduced, some of us became annoyed at having to go back to the Ruhi Institute House said you don't have to study the Ruhi books. But gradually it became the operation of the faith in this period, trying to get it consolidated, and it's a regular means of training people who have come into the faith and don't have a sound knowledge. And it was considered training, emphasis on training and service in the community. It's not the whole picture of the revelation. And just consider the opening remarks today. I mean, there's something much bigger than that. But this has a program that has some utility. I say to myself, I'm an old Baha'i, I've studied the books and everything. What am I going to study this for? You're going to study that because you want to know what the other new people are studying in the faith. You need to know, we all need to know the content of it. And on that basis, we can, with magnanimous open heart, read it and absorb it and use it, and it'll be good. And this has another important dimension to it that I think those of you that have been involved realize, and that is it creates bonds between the people. Since you're all sitting there together on the same basis of sharing your thoughts and ideas about what's being read, a certain closeness comes amongst the Baha'is. You become friends. Be that as it may, the effects of the centenary, the bicentenary commemorations, have opened some light on the edges. The House of Justice has never said no firesides and no study classes. Those are essential elements as far as I'm concerned they're embedded in Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha and the Guardian. There's no way the House could contradict that. So it's never said that. And now it's been encouraging. When I met with the House a year and a half ago, they said, we've mentioned firesides more often in the last 6-8 months than the previous 15-20 years. Of course, we didn't mention them when they were omnipresent. They were everywhere, so nobody mentioned them. I mean, they were just an element of the cause. But now there's more openness, encouragement about having firesides and having deepening classes. And so there's a blending of these things to some degree. We'll see how that goes forward because we have another bicentenary coming up now in another year. And we'll want to try to reproduce, if you will, the effects of the last one. Mainly, it showed that there's a large audience of people receptive to commemorate with us such events and to be a part of the community of interest, if you will, as it's being caused now. So So we need to see what we can do. I find that the Baha'is are sometimes burn out on what we call the collective activities of the faith. In other words, we're taking part in the collective activities, hoping that the collective activities will inspire us spiritually. There's the role of the individual is primary in the work of the cause. And it's from that individual and our own excitement about the faith and our vision of the faith that the collective activities take off. Okay, well, what did you bring to it? We have to ask ourselves what we brought to it. And it's Baha'u'llah telling us that the first duty assigned to man, opening words of the most holy book that we've ever had on this planet, it says is the recognition of the manifestation of God. So it's essential we understand that we're trying to attract people to the bond with the manifestation of God. That's our primary activity, and that's our primary duty for ourselves also. Then he adds right out of that, but we should be enacting and living the laws that he gives, and that these two for now are made one. There's a lot of Christian idea about it. Just hold to the name of Jesus, everything will be all right. And of course, it's not going to be all right. That's not what Jesus said. So we have this. We've come to this moment in the cause where I think we need to look a lot closer at our own knowledge of the teachings. That we're not just listening, remembering hearsay. We're actually go back to the books. We study them together. We ponder on them together. We look at study guides that may have existed in the past that were very helpful, and that we strengthen ourselves with resolve and spirit so that we can attract this confirmation, which I mentioned last night. The Guardian said was under pressure because nobody was drawing on it. Insufficient people drawing on it. We all have the potential of becoming what the divine plan says, and it doesn't say go out and hand out pamphlets and books. It says become incarnate light and breathe life into the souls of others. That's the mandate for the American Baha'i community. Become incarnate light and breathe life into the souls of others. On that basis, we have all kinds of progress. And then the institute process fits right into its proper place. We have more and more community services. We have now these core activities. It's so important. We remember far enough back that the local community didn't know what you were doing in the local community. You became a Baha'i, and then they said, well, now you're a Baha'i. That's it for now. Go and find people and teach. Of course, they weren't prepared to teach. Shoghi Effendi talks about 3 stages in making new believers. Attraction. You hear about it and they're attracted to it. Very important stage. That has to be then cultivated and encouraged. And then they get to confirmation. Confirmation, he says, is enrollment, is the acceptance in the heart of the manifestation. But that's not very far along still, we do that very early on because it's exciting, we're attracted to it, and we're ready to submit to it. But then the 3rd stage is consecration. He said, until the believers stand on their own feet, you see them give to the fund spontaneously. You see them talking about who they're teaching the faith to. Then you understand they're now becoming solid Baha'is. There's a letter from the Guardian that says, it's a long time to become a Baha'i. You can enroll pretty quick, but after that we have a challenge, And why is that? Because we have to absorb the whole vision of the cause and try to live it. Big, intense challenge it is. I bear witness that thou hast created me to know thee and to worship thee. This knowledge in that phrase is based on the word erfan. It's a word which means conscious awareness, recognition by vision, not acquisition by knowledge read in a book. Like, I've read about God, and yes, I believe what it says in that book. That's not what I bear witness that thou created me to know thee, in the sense of a deep, immediate kind of a knowledge that comes through the transformation of the Word of God, of absorbing the Word of God, of memorizing the Word of God. And if Shoghi Effendi has given us anything, he's given us all the tools. And this is what a being. When you think of what we know about Baha'u'llah, how great he was. By the way, being in the Holy Land, I became exposed to different materials and stories and things. Baha'u'llah was a revelator. He was the supreme revelator. The friends would be with him, and he would maybe have just received them into his presence, speaking to them, encouraging them, and he says, "Thank you very much, I'll join you again later." And sometimes they say, "Why did he dismiss us so quickly?" It's because he felt the impulse of revelation coming. And it didn't come all the time. It came in spurts and pulses, not organized. Organized is what people do after. Organized is what the master did, to agree. But surely Shoghi Effendi was the great organizer of the Baha'i teachings and of setting our vision straight about the first Baha'i century. Can you imagine, with all the contradictory reports and about what happened in the first 100 years? Without Shoghi Effendi's supreme gift of the God passes by, we wouldn't get the balance correct in everything. So these are his gifts, and of course his translations. Never mind his development of the world center. Never mind his execution of the 3 charters of the faith: the Tablet of Karnal for the development of the world center, the tablets of the divine plan for the propagation of the faith throughout the world, and the Will and Testament, which gave the outline of the institutions, the cardinal institutions of the faith, and how it should go forward. Shoghi Effendi was a wonder. He said to the pilgrims, he said there were enemies. Baha'u'llah had family members who were against him, some of them. Yahya being the principal one. Yahya, a young man that was really raised by Baha'u'llah, mentored by Baha'u'llah, couldn't speak in his presence. Everyone says, Yahya, when he was with Baha'u'llah, couldn't open his mouth. But nurtured such an envy and jealousy that he became the prime mover of evil in the dispensation. Opposed him, poisoned him, tried to have people kill him. Abdul-Baha had enemies in his family, but not all of them. He had the greatest relief, he had his wife, he had his daughters, but most of the others moved to the mansion and took up with the covenant breakers. There was a very critical period. We've had these periodic crises. A certain darkness overwhelms the faith, and then it comes out as a victory. And Shoghi Effendi describes them through the first Baha'i century. Is there any reason to imagine that we wouldn't have that also happen in the faith? Now, going forward. We can't tell at the moment where we are, but sometimes it's confusing. So Shoghi Effendi, the stories go that Baha'u'llah dismissed the friends, and then he went about his revealing. And the reason he dismissed the friends is that the act of revelation was so powerful it would overwhelm people completely. There's a story, one man said, I came up in the mansion, I didn't realize Baha'u'llah was sitting in the middle of the mansion on a pillow, revealing, and Aga Jan was taking the messages down that he was revealing. And he said, when I came into his presence, my knees started shaking. I couldn't stand up. Baha'u'llah stopped, and then he looked towards him and nodded, like, you can go now. And he backed off, and he said, it's just such an impression. Bharga's son, not Ruhi, but the other brother, was younger than Ruhi, than Ruhi. He was there, and he became very curious about this. He says, why does he send us away? I want to see when he's revealing. Can I see? They asked it. And they said, well, you have to ask the family. So they asked the family to ask Baha'u'llah. A couple of weeks passed. He was playing out outside the mansion, and they called him to come upstairs. Baha'u'llah wants to see you. So he went to the room. Somebody had been there on pilgrimage, I'm sure, where the curtain is, and he said, just step inside. So he stepped inside, and Baha'u'llah was pacing, and the brother said he was singing. I thought he was singing. So I stood there and listened, but as soon as I started feeling the impact of what he was singing, he said, my knees started shaking and I fainted. And I just went down. And as I was going down, Baha'u'llah said, hold on, Fez, goodbye. And the family knew what was going to happen, so they pulled him out from under the curtain, took him to a bed, put some rose water on him. He said, what happened to me? He said, that was the time of revelation you wanted to see. You saw that. Now, Aga John was the Reminiscences, the secretary of Baha'u'llah, and he had been endowed by Baha'u'llah with special capacities so that this thing could get written down. He himself testifies in his own notes. He said, I could get 1 out of every 5 verses written down. It came with such speed and such intensity. And he said sometimes Baha'u'llah would shine with such a light that I could hardly breathe. Or I'd feel as if waves of thunder were going out from his being across the whole face of the planet. There's no notes and he puts in the margins of some of the things that he did. Now after that, he'd have a session with Baha'u'llah and with Zayn, where Baha'u'llah would fill in all the missing parts and get the thing straight, and then he'd get Zayn to make a clean copy and so on. We haven't had the like of this. We counted the words of revelation of the Baba, and they came out to 5 million. We had it in the computers. And then we said, okay, what's left? Baha'u'llah. 5 million words means that the revelation of the Baba was greater than the combined revelation of all the previous prophets of God that we have any record of. So what's left for Baha'u'llah? So we counted Baha'u'llah, 6 million. 6 million discrete words of revelation. And that doesn't count hundreds of tablets which he said there's no one worthy of hearing these. Wash them in the river, destroy them, and so on. What an outpouring. Who is this universal manifestation of God? Shoghi Effendi answers letters. He says that Baha'u'llah is the universal manifestation for this planet. Although there's, in truth, there's no way to limit the powers of the universal manifestation because he is the primal will. He is the incarnation of the primal will, the face of God. So much so that in the Gone, Baha'u'llah has these various passages where he says at times the manifestations of God have declared that they are God. I and the Father are one, for instance, from Christianity. The meaning of it is that the manifestation is so self-effacing that God can speak through him in the first person. Friends, where would we be without the manifestation of God? I don't know how we would ever find out who we are and what we were for. It's amazing. So Aga John goes on revealing these things, and trying to transcribe what he wrote. They said that he was also, tireless. He had a ponytail. He had a nail in the wall, and where he was. He'd sit and have his knees up, sit on the floor, have his knee up, have the thing there, and be copying the things he was copying, and had the ponytail tied to a nail, so that when he fell asleep, it pulled his hair and he'd wake up again and go on with his work. In case you have trouble studying the writing and develop a ponytail. I read a couple of years ago 2 letters of the Guardian to new believers where he was saying that how much time we should spend with the revelations. That you're a new believer, you must spend a lot of time reading the revealed Word of God. He says he hopes you will find at least a couple hours a day to do this. Friends, when have any of us ever studied the writings? A couple hours a day. Maybe summer school. I don't know. In the past, because we come doing other things these days. I thought, I'm retired, I can do that. When I found this letter, I would, already left the World Senate. It took about 2 years to recover normal brain functions and physical functions after I was off the House of Justice. People say they prefer the House of Justice. Don't prefer the House of Justice. House of Justice is fine. The Baha'i have the House of Justice right where they want it. But the members of the House of Justice, they can use your prayers and support for it. It's a terrific burden. Intense. No way to imagine. And I always say the people that are ambitious to be on the House of Justice, they kind of think, well, if I could be a House of Justice member, that would be a great thing. They should be on the House of Justice for a couple of months and they'd see what it is. That would be a proper punishment for them. The guardian stands there in his invisible presence like a column in the middle of the House of Justice. Think of all the ways that he has brought forward the revelation, how he's organized, how he laid out the plans of the future, all these marvelous things. House of Justice members will come and go. The presence of the guardian and the guardianship will stay right there in the middle of the house through the centuries to come. How to review the writings of the guardian? I tell you, there's a couple new books out this last year, couple of years. What is it, Shoghi Effendi Through the Eyes of the Pilgrims or something like that? It's not the title, I think it is. This man has so faithfully gone back and looked at Pilgrim notes, not from the sense of the sensational, but just descriptions of Shoghi Effendi and these different moods, character, impressions that they had of him. It's a marvelous way to draw close to Shoghi Effendi. And it's so positive in the whole way it's conceived. Man has done a terrific service for us. Of course, we have Priceless Pearls sitting right in the middle. Let's go back to that if you haven't read it, read it. If you've read it, read it again. Look at that. The role of Shoghi Effendi. It's lifeless. And he suffered so much. The story about the families, some members of Baha'u'llah, some of Abdu'l-Baha'is. He said, in my case, the entire family as opposed. Everything. You never saw a cable when his mother died. Any little Baha'i off in some island somewhere, you saw a cable from Shoghi Effendi, but his mother died, no word to the Baha'u'llah. His father died, no word to the Baha'u'llah, because they continued to associate with their children who were coming. They're buried in the Baha'i cemetery in Haifa with their initials on the graves. I heard her say, she said, there were 10 years where I never saw Shoghi Effendi smile. 41 to 51. There's one photograph, passport photograph in the middle. His face is so pained that the house said, put that away, don't let anybody publish. And the victories of the 2-year plan in Africa revived his spirits. Now, he wasn't asleep during all that time. With all that pain he wrote, God passes by. He directed the activities of all these national plans all around the world in fulfillment of the combination of the teaching propagation from the will, from the divine plan, happens to the divine plan, and then the will, which in the will, Abdu'l-Bahá extends the obligation of teaching, and all should arise to teach the faith to everybody and all the Baha'is in the world. So you'll see in God Passes By the emphasis in the chapter about the teaching work and the propagation of the cause, the divine plans are mentioned, but the emphasis is on Baha'is all over the world teaching the cause. And that's present we have going on. The matchless translations he gave us. Again, he said in Haifa to the friends, read my translations. You can trust them. Because we had older translations, they're a bit confusing sometimes. They're all Baha'i scriptures, I'm sure some of you don't remember that. Wonderful, but it was, in English, there was nothing there. write home about or even understand, for that matter. There's a lot said about George Townsend. I was rereading what praise of the guardian of his help and support. But I've also compared manuscripts. The Gone suggestions by George and the final version. The final version is usually Shoghi Effendi's decision already. So yes, he sought others' advice, but he made the final decision. I don't think there's any way we could imagine that he couldn't have done it without the help of those friends. He managed everything on his own. Even when he was at Oxford, there's a student notebook in which he has the names of God in Arabic, and then he's found counterparts in the literature, the great English literature of the ages. And he writes down, something for Almighty, and he puts Keats, or he writes down powerful, the all-powerful, and he puts Shelley, or he puts his sources. He was studying how these concepts of the names of God translate into English. It's extraordinary. He has these wonderful letters which are quoted in Priceless Pearl of university authorities and authors who say what a job he's done. And translating, for instance, prayers and meditations of Baha'u'llah, or the Dunbar itself, which is an extraordinary work, gift to us. This translation of prayers and meditations, by the way, we tend to, this is more portable, and now when I came back from Haifa, I saw when we asked for prayers, people would pull out their telephones, and I thought, boy, these American Baha'is have a direct line, huh? Prayers and meditations, don't lose sight of it. We've never had anything like this in the history of religion. We have Baha'u'llah pouring out. I like to call the ones where it's in his first person, clearly in his name, the kind of prayers that when you open it and you read, you say, "Thou seest me locked up in my prison house," and you say, "Oh, that's not for me." And you go on, and you never read the rest of the prayer because that's not my prayer. It's his prayer, but he's translated all these so that we could see into the experience and position of the manifestation of God. And to the American convention of the moment, after he'd sent the manuscript to America for publication, he said that he hoped out of all the works of Baha'u'llah that this one would enable the friends to draw nigh unto Baha'u'llah, that he might draw nigh unto them. Same principle. Love me that I may love thee. If thou lovest me not, thy love can always reach. Go and explore that book, friends, if you haven't. It's a terrific gift from the guardian. Never mind Baha'u'llah pouring out his heart and his whole being. My wife and I use it for devotions in the morning. We read alternate prayers, get to the end, and we go back to the beginning again. Now we've done that 2 or 3 times at the beginning and get the feel for the shape of the book. It's daunting to find things, and there's so much in it. So rich. Never mind, I think there's one prayer in there that's 24 pages long. You don't want to start it just before breakfast. How Shoghi Effendi has organized the teachings for us. I'm working on a book of a manuscript that was started here called The Essentials of Baha'i Belief, which is extracts, selections from the words of Shoghi Effendi, where he describes the basic Baha'i teachings. Short things. You can all read all the books, but this is a kind of overview that introduces us to the way he defines fundamental verities or fundamental truths of the faith, which I think is important that we do that. I suggest you make your own book of that sort. It's very interesting practice to go and look and see where does he list the principles. Abdul Baha's, we have the list of 12 principles, and later we found out that It wasn't 12, sometimes it was 16, sometimes it was 11, sometimes it was 8. But we got 12 fixed in our minds. Shoghi Effendi, in his chapter in God Passes By, reviewing Abdu'l-Baha''s travels in the West, lists the principles. There are about 16 of them, I think they're there. But he lists them with verbs rather than just saying equality of men and women. What do Baha'is believe? We believe in universal peace. Oh, that's nice. I'm glad you believe in that. Excuse me? When we don't describe the principle, when we just name it without any descriptive, it proposes a plan for the realization of a universal and permanent peace. Okay, this makes a lot more sense than saying we believe in peace. Oh, that's nice. Again, what's the basis of that? How did you reach that conclusion? So, looking at the principles, looking at the doctrines of the faith, rereading Dispensation of Baha'u'llah, which I don't know when you came in, but that was required reading. I had to know that and meet with the local assembly to ask me questions about it. Fortunately, they hadn't read very much of it themselves, so it wasn't too challenging. But I almost didn't get in the faith. They were a little hesitant. One guy said, I hope you don't turn out like the youth we brought in last year. Oh dear, yes. One of the great regrets of my life is that hurt, and I said, I'm going to try to be better, but I didn't know that youth. I should have looked for that youth, because this community we're build your spirit by tests. They used to brag about having sent out more pioneers than any community in that area. That was quite true. We all went pioneer pretty quick as soon as we understood what. All right. You're old believers. I don't want to be preaching things to you here that you already know very well. We've covered a little bit the idea of his translations. Later he became so occupied that his last major translation was Epistle to the Son of the Wolf. That's another book that's kind of fallen out of sight. People don't always know about it. And someone was saying it's as if he put his pen down and never lifted it until the end of the book. Even though it's a compilation. It's Baha'u'llah's compilation of his own teachings for the Son of the Wolf, for this wicked priest. He was so wicked that nobody knew how to deliver the book to him. Baha'u'llah sent the book to be delivered, and the Baha'is are saying, how do we do this? So one of them dressed up as a postman, packaged the book in a little package. And this man was in the front row in the mosque, and when they did the prostrations, he came by and dropped the book and continued out the door and disappeared. Yeah, that's the story about how it was delivered. And he opened it and looked at it and kind of blanched and got up out of the service and left himself. The eyes were watching, so what's going to happen?
Did you take the book with you?
Yeah. Yeah, a nephew tried to sell it to us. A nephew of the Son of the Wolf said, I have the original, do you want to buy it? Kind of thing.
How much?
Yeah. I don't know, I wasn't involved, and we didn't have a negotiation about that. Generally, the enemies of the faith, the covenant breakers would sometimes come with precious things to sell at the Pilgrim house. And the guardian's rule was, you don't buy anything, you don't take anything from the public. Now, all of that, they tried to sell it, they couldn't sell it. It ended up, they thought this was important, it can't just be lost. They gave it all to the British Library in England. Big collection of tablets and writings, original things. Not the Dunbars. The final version of the Dunbars has been lost. They stole that with the satchels that they took. While Abdu'l-Baha was washing the body of Baha'u'llah, Muhammad Ali said, these things are going to get wet, and ran off with them as quick as he could. When Abdu'l-Baha asked for them in the evening, he said, what satchels? I don't know any satchels. And Abdullah writes in a tablet that at that moment I realized that all the suffering that had come to Baha'u'llah was going to come to me too. Anyway, what did the British Library do? They said, well, let's see, we need some Baha'i scholar that can analyze the contents of this trove of boxes of materials. So they called Mujan Moment, asked him to come and organize. He's a Baha'i, he's written many books about the faith and so on. He's a good scholar. So he went, and then as soon as he understood what the problem was, he got in touch with the House of Justice. House of Justice said, no. Catalog it all, copy it all, send us copies. So we have all of it back again in a certain section of the archives so it can be checked on. They're chemically, they didn't change too many things. A few tablets were changed, but as far as we tell, they weren't interested in distorting the revelation, they believed in it. So those things will come forward too. But it was difficult. Here comes some young man who wants to sell the tablet of visitation for the Rizwan garden, revealed by Baha'u'llah. No thank you. I think all these things eventually they'll come back to us. The Dawnbreaker, so early on in the Guardian's career, he took the time to go to what was the previous draft. Before the final copy was made, that's the one that's been lost. There was a previous draft, which was Nabil's copy, with handwritten corrections and changes in it. There were maybe 5 different hands on that. We didn't know who all the hands, not hands of the God, but the different writing on it, who had made the corrections. Some were made in Abdullah's time. They were based on 2 tablets of Baha'u'llah, in which he instructs Nabil to write the chronicles and to not exaggerate and to list his sources as he does it. Nabil's living in Akka at the time. Baha'u'llah says to him, and I want it in fascicles, 30 fascicles. And each one should be delivered at 3 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon each week. Well, the Supreme Manifestation is getting you to write your history. Fascicles. Portions. Different, different same length kinds of bundles of material. So he started at the beginning, he did it, and it got organized. Now, Shoghi Effendi had to go over that old manuscript. He had a clean one made from that. But then he added back in some things that had been removed by somebody. And he took other things out that hadn't been. And you say, well, okay, why have we removed anything from it? It seems that some of the paragraphs had worse swearing about the enemies that you've ever seen in your life. Nabil would send them to hell with great gusto, yeah. So Shoghi Effendi made this wonderful book so that we might be inspired by the depth of devotion of these early heroes and heroines of the faith. We've kind of lost track of it, but I think we should go back to Dunbar, definitely in our own personal study. Again, this is part of our individual covenant with Baha'u'llah and the Master and the Guardian. And then bring the effects of that into the collective activities, and maybe we'll begin to see some change in them. At least we'll be on sound ground, if you will, so to speak. It's unfortunate, moving around. Some of the people that have just grown up with the newer system, they don't know who the Guardian is. Mm-hmm. Or somebody said, he was a former leader of the faith. You don't put the sign of God, becomes a former leader. So, you older Baha'is have to have an influence in the community by talking about these things, making them appealing. They are so appealing. I mean, when you read this, take the time to read it. You have to ask yourself, have I been a proper reader? Have I read the literature of the faith? have I gotten back to reading the literature of the faith.
Can it be broken up as Facebook posts? Because that's really all most
That might be politically incorrect. I'm afraid the Friends will start answering, quoting some of our present leaders, not the Baha'i leaders, the other ones. One of the great, at the heart of materialism, the Guardian said, is politics. The delusion that we think we can improve the world through politics is one of the great materialistic delusions. We should cheer them on, tear the world in shreds. Yeah, fine with us. We don't have any problem with that. I don't have to say that, but we really don't have a problem with it. We say that's the plan of God. It's the disintegration of the old world order, and the over and over proving that these things have no solution. You can't solve it. And let's fix the world order so that when it burns down and we build the new one on its ashes, we can say, I helped to fix the old one. Well, what are we doing? So the new world order will be built on the ashes of the old one. We want to fix the old one first before it burns down? I don't think so. We've got enough to do. Our own job as Baha'is, our own job is spending the time. Nobody's revoked after Allah's God to find some receptive soul and shower loving kindness on them and encourage them until they become alive. At least one a year. If we all did that, the cost doubles every year. It's not happening every year. And we need to think about that. And if my wife is too lazy or my husband's too tired or something, I have to take on two of them a year to help balance the whole thing out. The Dawnbreakers, what a role. Dawnbreakers and God Passes By. Shoghi Effendi, when he talks about the study of the writings, my own take on it from the compilation of Thousand Justice prepared on individual deepening in the writings of the cause, deepening our knowledge of the faith. Shoghi Effendi, in some letters, he talks about how Baha'is must read the writings. And then he says how they must read and reread the writings. Nobody does the Igan. It's never finished. There's this scene at the Pilgrim table one time with the Western Pilgrim Sharif, and he asked if they had read the Dawnbreakers, or if they read the Igan. Have you studied the Igan? Have you read the Igan? And went around the table. And one man at the end, from America, said, yes, that he'd done it. The Guardian didn't say anything. I'm just so struck by that. I went around this, but the next Pilgrim group, he said, friends, I was asking if they'd studied the Igan, if they're studying the Igan. One of the friends said they'd done it. He said, you can't do the Igan. It doesn't do. You change every minute. The Igan is full of wonders that flow to us. I don't want to see or hear your answer, but how long ago did you read the Igan? How often do you think one should read the Igan? An interesting study is to look at the gleanings, which Shoghi Effendi wrote or developed, translated later, his selection of a range of the writings of Baha'u'llah, so that we'd have some book. And friends at the time I came in said the gleanings came as a result of Baha'is complaining that the non-Baha'is were saying, well, you don't have a Bible. So in a sense, the gleanings is like our Bible. It's the books of selection from so many different books, which gives you a whole range of it. And Shoghi Effendi said, I selected them so that they would all be appropriate for the public. You can put these in public libraries. There's nothing there that can't be there. There's some of the other writings that are more specific and will be confusing to the public, so they're not there. And he said he hoped that this book would become the constant companion of every believer. Do you have it by your bedside or somewhere? And I asked that now, say that's in my telephone. You look at it in your telephone. The Dawnbreakers is to be studied over and over again. The Igan is to be studied over and over again. He says, read, reread, then the next thing is painstakingly study the literature of the cause. This is from the Advent of Divine Justice. And another, he says, the Baha'is must digest these central books of the faith, digest. Igan, some answered questions. dawnbreakers, be able to repeat the stories of the dawnbreakers, use it for your own personal inspiration. So you say, okay, now we've got read, reread, we have painstakingly study, we have digest. What's next? You must master the contents of these central books of the faith. How do you make it your own so that you can repeat them and you'll get it right? And then you can meditate later on so that the deeper truths of them can continually come through and inform you and raise the dimension of your consciousness, so to speak. Is it finished there? One more stage, he says. Memorize characteristic passages of these books so that in the teaching work you say the exact words that as they were revealed. This has the greatest influence on the hearts of the listeners. Helen Bishop, some of you, you're old enough, you've heard of Helen Bishop. The Guardian asked her to write the introduction to the Western, his translation of the Dawn. That's pretty interesting. And she wrote it and was adopted and was there. More recently, the House Justice said we're well enough known now that we don't need introductions to the works of Baha'u'llah, published them by themselves, so that's happened. Helen Bishop tells a story on herself. She said that way back in the 30s, she was traveling around, teaching many different places on faith and universities. She was a well-educated woman from Portland. And she said, I was going on pilgrimage. So she said, I have to think of some really good questions for the Guardian, you know. And she said later, I realized that I was thinking of questions that would impress him about the nature of my questions. So she comes and she says, I was there, and he warmly welcomed me and sat me next to him. And then he began to speak to the other friends who'd come, addressing them. He says, it was a half an hour, he didn't look at me, he didn't talk to me, he didn't say anything. And I started really feeling very, very concerned about what was happening. And then she said, then I remembered my questions that I'd created with the idea of impressing him. And I realized what was the matter. So I renounced those things. And he turned to me with a smile and he said, so, Mrs. Bishop, you must have some questions. At which point she said I couldn't remember any of the questions. There's so many things like that. There's so lovely. The next night, she said, I worked out a question to ask him. I said, how can I improve when I'm teaching the faith? How can I improve the way I teach the faith? And she said, I had no idea what he would answer. But what he did answer, I couldn't have imagined either. He said, Mrs. Bishop, you should memorize the hidden words. Then in the course of your talks, these phrases will come out. Touch the hearts of your listeners. And Abdu'l-Bahá has already told us we should memorize the hidden words. Live by the hidden words and memorize the hidden words. How close to your bedside is hidden words? I have that all the time. Most of us have lived long enough and found out how important it is. Apart from these books that Shoghi Effendi prepared for us and the encouragement he gave us to study them, he also had a steady line of communications orienting the Baha'is first on Baha'i administration. He suspended the enactment of the divine plan, the tablets of the divine plan, in any systematic form for 17 years, until 1937, when he encouraged the first 7-year plan to start. By that time, he'd set up national assemblies, local assemblies first all over the world, and then national assemblies. And the Baha'is were saying, what's happened to the cause of God? Abdu'l-Bahá spoke about spiritual things, and all Shoghi Effendi talks about is administration. You know, it's a kind of repeat of, why are we doing these Urhi books kind of thing. It's not exactly parallel, but it has a little of that. You know, it's a switch, and during the switch, there's a period of consternation. So he talked about how important these principles were, how that the Baha'is had to absorb them. And when you're teaching new Baha'is, he instructed MSAs amongst various topics that the Baha'is should be enlightened with regard to are the principles and practices of Baha'i administration. So he says you can find those in that first book that they published of his letters in America, here in America, called Baha'i Administration. It's still full of valid things. It's not something that's past. So all these things that he's written us have an immediacy about them, even though the period in application, of first application of them is past. Well, friends, our time is up for this morning. I'm sorry it's a bit scattered, everything, but I wanted to come at it without any fixed program so that I could just share with you thoughts that come into my mind after hearing that you're all old seasoned Baha'is. Thank you very much.
Thank you.